Thank you, First Minister. The next item of business is a debate on motion 105 in the name of John Swinney on Ambitious for Scotland. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on John Swinney to move the motion.
Move.
Thank you. And I now call on Anis Sarwar to speak to and move amendment 105.4.
Thank you so much, President Officer. Let me start with saying I'll move the amendment in my name, because normally that's what often members forget to do at the end of their speeches, so I'll start with that. Can I first of all say I welcome much of the content of the First Minister's opening statement, but the reality is the balance of the statement and the motion is stark. Overwhelming majority of the statement focused on issues that I think people would want to be the concentration of this SNP government. But if you look at the balance of the motion we're being asked to vote on today, it's overwhelmingly about one issue and one issue alone, and that is the SNP First Minister's only ambition and only obsession, and that is the issue of independence. And I think that is a missed opportunity in this first debate of this new Parliament. But let me make a broader point. Is one of the big challenges we've had facing our politics in Scotland is far too often the instincts of this SNP government and the SNP as a party is to try and talk about Scotland as if it's one homogenous unit, one mind, one view, and not that there is a mix of views across the country. Because the reality is, it's not that Scotland has one voice or one view on a referendum, or Scotland has one voice or one view on independence. There are big differing views right across this country. And so if he truly wants to be a First Minister for all of Scotland, he can't deny those variants of views. And I'll say a bit more about ambition in a moment. But let me just say, to hear someone that has been in government for 20 years to plead for some kind of fresh start, frankly, people will not believe it. This is a government and this is a First Minister that has spent more time in the last 20 years telling Scotland what he can't do rather than what he can do. Because this ultimately is a party that plays into the very same fear and blame I spoke about last week. Those that want to create fear in our communities in order to divide us, and those who want to pass the buck and responsibility by pointing the fingers of blame somewhere else rather than taking responsibility for their own actions and their own responsibility in government. And much of what John Swinney spoke about in his opening statement is actually to correct the record that he has helped build in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, the SNP have created the layer after layer of bureaucracy and public sector bodies that he now says he wants to strip away. Year after year for the last 20 years is this SNP government that's taken power away from the regions of Scotland and centralised power that he now says he wants to push back out to the regions. Happy to give way.
Thank you, President Officer, and thank Mr Sarwar for giving way. Of course, we've had a test of some of Mr Sarwar's theories on this in recent weeks, where we've had an election where the people have decided. Would it not be better for Mr Sarwar to allow the power to be in the people's hands and to allow the people to be able to decide on their own future by supporting this motion?
Well, Mr Gray is going to argue his view, I'm going to argue my view. That's democracy. And the reality is, right across the country, there is a mix of views, because it was very clear during the election. Actually, the First Minister said in his own statement, he didn't say it was an independence election. He said it was a cost of living election, because people voted in this election based on what was happening in their pockets and what was happening in their public services. He also mentioned energy, but the reality is this SNP government sold our energy wealth on the cheap. And what this Parliament needs to do is to redefine community benefit and community ownership for lots of parts across this country. But we also need a different kind of government. Not more gimmicks, not more grievance, but actually getting things done. And another area, that I'll agree with John Swinney is there is big global insecurity and global instability. And at a time of global insecurity and instability, what people across this country need is a relentless focus on the issues that matter to them right now, and that is accessing those vital public services. It is bringing down their bills, and it is making sure they don't continue to pay more and more and get less and less in return. So that's the ambition I want to speak about today, because there is no shortage of ambition in our country. Families are ambitious for what happens to them. They're ambitious for their children. They're ambitious for their communities. But where is the ambition to return the NHS to the founding principles, free and available at the point of need, broken by this SNP government? The record shows that people are paying £12,000 for a hip replacement, £8,000 for a knee replacement, £5,000 for a cataract under this SNP government. That's how you return that ambition. Where's the ambition to make Scotland's schools the best in the world again, falling down the international league tables under this government? Where's the ambition to make people feel safe and secure in their communities? But the reality is that when the SNP talks about ambition, what they really mean is their own party's ambition or their own individual's ambition. And we got a really stark example of it this week. People who are their most vociferous supporters asked to put their hard-earned cash into a movement that they believed in and they support, which is their democratic right. Put their hard-earned cash. And what did people that were charged with the responsibility do? They robbed them of that opportunity. They embezzled them of that opportunity. And the reality is there is countless opportunities that have been embezzled by this SNP government for 20 years for people across this country. So yes, we need ambition. Yes, we need to deliver for people across this country, but that requires a different kind of government. It requires honesty, it requires transparency, and it requires actually put into words what the First Minister said in much of his opening statement, rather than using those issues to divide Scot against Scot. So what we need is real ambition to bring down waiting lists, real ambition to end the ATM rush for a GP, real ambition to make life more affordable for families, real ambition to bring down bills, real ambition to return police on our streets, real ambition to build the homes this country needs, real ambition to make sure we have economic growth for every part of our country, real ambition so every child gets the opportunities they need to succeed, real ambition to end homelessness and eradicate poverty in this country. We need a parliament and a government to have ambition that matches the people of this great country. And that can only be achieved if John Swinney focuses on the issues at hand and the issues that matter every day, rather than looking for reasons to divide us.
Thank you. Members who take interventions don't have the time taken from them, but it's still up to them whether or not they take interventions. I now call on Ross Greer to speak to and move Amendment 105.3.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I see Mr Sarwar's constructive and collaborative tone lasted about a week in this place. Clearly no lessons learned from that election. I move the amendment in my name, Presiding Officer. Every Green MSP elected to this Parliament was elected on a mandate to support the cause of independence. The gains that we made make this the biggest ever majority for independence in this Parliament. And we are here to assert that mandate because, of course, it's normal in a democracy that a parliamentary majority can pursue the issues that it's won a mandate from the voters on. But what we've seen throughout this campaign, what we're seeing this afternoon in Parliament, are increasingly desperate mental gymnastics from unionist parties who claim that we somehow don't have that mandate. We heard from the Labour Party during the campaign that their win in the 2024 general election in Scotland was a mandate against another independence referendum. But that only has any credibility whatsoever if you ignore the fact that they rejected the SNP's equivalent mandates in 2015, 2017 and 2019. We've heard the once-in-a-generation line, that it's not yet been a generation. I would ask those, not quite yet, I would ask those who use that particular line to reflect on the fact that 800,000 people were old enough to vote at the election just a few weeks ago, but who were not old enough to vote in the referendum in 2014. Is it really credible to continue with that line that it's not yet been a generation? I absolutely respect the cause of unionism. I respect those who disagree with me and my party on independence. It's important that unionists are well represented in this Parliament. But whether we are for or against independence, surely everyone who sits in this place should be a Democrat. And democracy is not a one-off event. The public are no more bound by the vote in 2014 today than this Parliament is bound by its predecessors. Democracy is a system that we live in every day of our lives. And this debate, I think, requires some honesty. Is this a voluntary union? Was it only a voluntary union until 2014, but it's not anymore? we've got to wonder why people are so angry and cynical. Well, it's because of these anti-democratic games that are being played. I don't expect the Labour Party in particular to have some kind of Damasian conversion to the cause of independence, but I would expect respect for Scottish democracy and Scottish voters. So I credit Paul Sweeney for making suggestions, for being open to a conversation about how we can move forward on the constitutional question. I would say that the best time to have that particular debate was a decade ago, but I welcome that there are some in the Labour Party open to having it now. I will take Mr Hoy's intervention.
Mr Greer for taking that intervention. If he believes in democracy and giving voters a choice, why did the Scottish Green Party stand in so few constituencies?
Mr Hoy may have missed it, but the Scottish Greens gave every voter in Scotland the opportunity to vote for us, and far more of them chose to do so than chose to vote for the Scottish Conservative Party. As I said, Presiding Officer, I respect the arguments for the Union and against independence, but I can't respect the increasingly desperate ways that are being used to justify denying giving the people of Scotland a choice over our future. The Scottish Greens have always believed that independence is the best choice for Scotland, not as an end, but as a means to a greater end. It's our route back in to the European Union, to undo the incredible damage that Brexit has done and to regain our European citizenships. It would give us the power to tackle poverty through things like minimum wage laws. It would give us the full fiscal powers that we need to invest in the infrastructure that we really need to have thriving communities and a successful economy. It would give us power over our energy systems, where we can make the switch from an energy system, an energy regulation system that just maximises the profits of a handful of companies, and towards one that actually provides affordable energy for everyone. The independence movement of 2014 grew support for our cause by focusing on that vision, by focusing on what we can achieve with the powers of a normal nation. In the 12 years since, though, I've got to be honest, I do think that far too much of our focus as a movement has been on process rather than on the cause and that vision itself. And we know that much of this is in Westminster's hands. We believe that's wrong, but it is the reality. And we should focus on what we can change, and that's public opinion. There's currently a marginal lead for independence in the polls, but I think we can concede it is basically 50-50. And the best way... No. The best way to grow support for... no, Mr Kerr. The best way to grow support for Scottish self-government is to do self-government well, to maximise the use of the powers that we've got. That's the focus of today's Green Amendment. The powers of this Parliament are limited, but we have not yet exhausted them. In 2014, we grew support for independence by tying it to that sense of hope and optimism. I don't feel that there's a lot of hope and optimism in Scottish politics right now. There is a deep sense of frustration with our public services. We have a lot to be proud of from the era of devolution. This is the only part of the UK where child poverty is actually falling, for example. But too many reforms have been delayed and deferred, most obviously to the council tax. But in other areas, on housing, of course, if we had the borrowing powers of a normal nation, we could build far more. But what we can do right now is set standards to cut bills through energy efficiency for new builds in particular. We can use the rent control powers that this Parliament passed just a few months ago to help people save and keep a roof over their head. Our health service is crying out for reform, some of them major and structural, others very simple. People just want the services that they rely on every day to work. They just want someone to pick up the phone at their GP surgery when they call it. When it comes to our environment, there's no need to wait for independence to clean up our rivers and our lochs. And we can do all of these things to demonstrate that when decisions are made here, they benefit people and planet. We can grow support for full self-government through independence by maximising the use of the self-governing powers that we have right now. But we should also do it because it is the right thing to do here and now, regardless of constitutional objectives. And I want to close on that note, Presiding Officer, because of course there's a majority for independence in this Parliament, but there is not a single party majority. Every progressive party in this Parliament has the opportunity to work together, to cooperate, to collaborate, to move Scotland forward on the areas that we do agree. The vast majority of members of this Parliament agree on the need for us to eradicate child poverty. A vast majority of the members of this Parliament agree on the need to take action to tackle the climate emergency. At the last election, as Gillian Mackay noted last week, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, the two opposition parties who did cooperate with the government to secure progress on the areas that we cared about, gained at that election. I think there's something for every party to learn from that. So the Greens will be proud to support the motion today. We will, of course, push for our amendment as well, because we believe in the cause of independence. We believe in putting Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. But we also believe that this Parliament has a duty to act here and now, to give our children the best possible future that they can, to help people save money on their bills, to lift families out of poverty, and to tackle the climate emergency. This Parliament is more than capable of pursuing Scotland's constitutional future and taking action on the issues that affect people in their lives here and now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, I'll just remind members who wish to speak in this debate to press their buttons. Not everyone has so far. I now call on Russell Finlay to speak to and move Amendment 105.2. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, President Officer. I begin by moving the amendment in my name about our ambitions for Scotland. So here we go again, the first debate of the new parliamentary term. But it's not about the NHS, with patients stuck waiting for years in misery and agony. It's not about education, with pupils told to accept mediocrity and classroom violence. It's not about Scots being forced to pay more and more tax to bankroll the SNP's out-of-control benefits bill. Nor is it about the betrayal of Scotland's oil and gas workers by two governments, SNP and Labour. And it's not about any of these important issues, because John Swinney, of course, only believes in one thing: breaking up the United Kingdom. He's holding Scotland back, stuck in the grip of constitutional paralysis. His party is not actually interested in improving people's lives or fixing the public services that they broke. For them, that's too much like hard work. And of course, the SNP will never be honest about the financial cost of independence. If they ever got their way, Scotland would face a funding gap of £26 billion.
Shocking.
Scots would face extreme tax rises, while public services would be cut to the bone. Presiding Officer, the timing of today's debate is comical. Today, of all days, John Swinney is banging the independence drum when the news agenda is dominated by his party stealing money from their own members and supporters. Money the SNP promised to ring-fence for independence. And here we are, just 24 hours after Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrow, admitted using over £400,000 of stolen money to fund their lavish lifestyle. Presiding Officer, in 2021, John Swinney went onto the BBC and publicly dismissed valid concerns about the SNP's finances. Nicola Sturgeon also told those with concerns to stay quiet. And when questioned by police, she repeatedly said, "No comment." The tactics of organised crime. And today, John Swinney, today of all days, John Swinney reckons the SNP can be trusted to take full control of an independent Scotland and our nation's finances. The same John Swinney who didn't have a clue that his childhood friend, who he appointed SNP Chief Executive, was plundering their own party. You would need to have a heart of stone not to laugh. The painful lack of self-awareness on the SNP benches. Does John Swinney not see how this sounds to people who despair at what this Parliament has become? The sad truth is, Presiding Officer, that John Swinney is never, ever going to change. We shouldn't hope for any change at all. But the Scottish Conservatives will always stand up to and call out this nonsense. In 2014, the people of Scotland said, no, John Swinney's never respected their vote. He should know the law is clear. The Parliament does not have the power to hold a referendum. Nicola Sturgeon went to court on this. She spent hundreds of thousands of pounds, taxpayers' money this time, and she lost. And in the most recent Scottish election, More voters backed unionist parties than those supporting separation. Yet none of these facts matter to John Swinney and the SNP. Presiding Officer, I've recently spent time in Aberdeen along with our UK party leader, Kenny Badenoch, and we see the damage being inflicted in Scotland's oil and gas sector, with thousands of jobs being lost. Labour don't care. They remain against new drilling. So here's my challenge to John Swinney today. His party still has a presumption against new oil and gas licences. So let's send a message of support to the oil and gas workers, a call to action, end the SNP's opposition, get Britain drilling again, and drop the damaging independence obsession.
Thank you. I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to speak to and move Amendment 105.1.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Members will be delighted to hear I don't plan to take all of my time this afternoon. I intend to cede some of it to Duncan Dunlop, who will be making his first speech later this afternoon. But in the time that I do have, can I remind the Chamber that debates like this used to be marquee occasions. There were times when the galleries would be full, the press gallery absolutely stuffed, and even the cameras of the world trained on this Parliament, because the question of Scotland's future in the Union was so unpredictable at that point. But there is a muscle memory now, a performative element to debates like this, because a Section 30 will be requested this afternoon, Presiding Officer. A Section 30 will be requested and it will be declined. Why? Because John Swinney manifestly failed in the test that he set himself just a month ago. He said on the 28th of April, and he couldn't have been clearer, I am saying, and I quote this from the Scotsman, I am saying that we need to make sure the SNP get a majority to make sure that we can take forward an independence referendum. Presiding Officer, 59% of the general public, the voting public, disagreed with that assertion and voted for parties in this chamber who did not back a second referendum. It is only because the vagaries of our voting system, the gaming of the system by the parties of independence, that we are now in this situation. I will briefly take an intervention from Ross Greer.
I remember in the last session of this Parliament where we pointed out that the pro-independence parties had won not just a majority of seats but had won a majority of votes, and Mr Cole-Hamilton had to come up with a whole new reason against a mandate for a referendum at that point. So why do the goalposts keep shifting?
Presiding Officer, Ross Greer is celebrated as one of the brightest members of this Parliament, yet basic arithmetic seems to be escaping him. 59% of the public is bigger than 41%. I think he should consult his maths teacher. And as such, because they have failed in this effort, that is now a covenant that the First Minister tried to establish with the people, which must be set aside, because a Section 30 order is not going to build a new hospital in Shetland. 18 months of campaigning around the Constitution is not going to duel the lethal A9 any faster. Identifying offices for embassies and high commissions overseas for a future independent Scotland is going to do nothing to reduce child poverty. And the interminable debates about what currency an independent Scotland would or would not adopt are going to do nothing to instruct an independent review that is so vitally needed for maternity services in the far north of Scotland. In all truth, Presiding Officer, we have never, as a chamber, since the SNP came to power, fully flexed the muscles of devolution, fully flexed one of the most empowered, devolved nations in this world to address the things that all of our constituents have decidedly sent us to Parliament to discuss. On the cost of living emergency, I'll give him his credit, the First Minister did touch on the cost of living emergency. This was a cost of living election, but nothing about 18 months of debate around the Constitution is going to make people's homes warmer by instructing that emergency programme of home insulation that we need. It's not going to address the crisis in our social care system, which is keeping 2,000 Scots in hospital who neither need nor want to be there but can't get home for want of a social care package. It's not going to lift up education, and it's not going to... I don't have time. And it's not going to...
You do have time.
OK. I'll take an intervention from
Nick. Oh.
Giving way
One of the fundamental challenges we face in social care is the recruitment and retention of workforce. And that is a particular conspicuous challenge in our Highlands and rural communities. Is that not a convincing argument for powers over immigration to be devolved to this Parliament?
I do not disagree with Mr Arthur that Brexit's been a disaster for social care, but it would be a lot easier to fix social care if his government paid people more to work in it, or gave them key worker housing that addressed the shortage of housing in the Highlands and Islands that he discussed. So he's got a nerve to raise that with him. And we need to get Scotland moving again, presiding officer. Just last week, this nation was embarrassed when the technology of the 19th century came to the aid of passengers of the 21st century, because the Clyde paddle steamer, the Waverley, had to rescue passengers because of a Calmac vessel broken down. This is a microcosm of the inadequacies of this SNP government. Taking time for parliamentary debates like this does nothing to serve our constituents. No wonder they do not have the attention or the trust in this Parliament that they used to, because they just don't believe that they can deliver for it.
Thank you. And I now call on Malcolm Offord. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So, here we go again. Welcome back to Groundhog Day. Doesn't the SNP just love debating matters which are reserved to Westminster instead of doing the day job? Is there any wonder why 2 million Scots did not vote in this election? We'll start again. Is there any wonder why 2 million Scots did not vote in the election on 7th of May? Presiding Officer, Holyrood controls 60% of the spending in Scotland. Moreover, control over devolved matters in this chamber controls 80% of daily life in Scotland. Our schools, our hospitals, our roads, our policing, our communities. That is what hard-working Scots want this Parliament to focus on, how to build prosperity for families and communities. No endless debates on this never-ending question. So why does the SNP indulge itself by continually debating matters reserved to Westminster? And, Presiding Officer, we all know why. It's something called a deflection strategy, because they don't want to focus on the track record of what they've done in their day job, the fact that our economy is anemic and promotes welfare over work, the fact our taxes are too high and provide a disincentive to productivity, the fact our planning is so bad that SMEs are shutting down, the fact that in healthcare 93% of Scots say that it needs reform, the fact that in education our schools have gone from outstanding to average with the attainment gap widening, the fact that in jobs and skills we have 750,000 adult Scots not working, yet we bring in 300 welders from the Philippines to work in our shipyards, the fact that community cohesion is breaking down in our most vulnerable communities. That is why 2 million Scots did not vote. There's no point, is there? Because nothing changes. All we get is managed decline and mid-table mediocrity, scunnered by the SNP. Never their fault, always victims. Well, let's turn to this motion about IndyRef 2. The First Minister asked a question, is the UK a voluntary union? There's never been any doubt about that being a voluntary union. Margaret Thatcher made it very clear to Alex Salmond that the UK was a voluntary union. She said to him she didn't want the UK to break up, but if he delivered that there was a democratic mandate for the Scottish people to leave the UK, they can leave the UK. And the Tories have got themselves in a mess on this because all they say is no, ever, always no to another referendum. Yes, sir. Point. I'll give you the exact numbers on that, because that is a key point. That is an absolutely key point, and that's what we're going to come to in this discussion. Even in 2016, after the EU Brexit, the leader of the Tories, Ruth Davidson, said it was unconstitutional to say there will never, ever be another referendum. We can't sit in this chamber and say there will never, ever be another referendum. But we can say in this chamber that right now, there's no appetite for the Scottish people to have such a thing. And we should at least be saying to ourselves that for at least 10 years we should not be talking about this, because this Parliament should focus right now on devolved matters to make Scotland the most successful part of the UK. Yes, I'll take the intervention.
I thank Lord Offord for giving way. In this chamber, he promised the smack of firm opposition. So why is there no reform amendment to this woeful SNP motion?
The answer to that question, Mr Hoy, is we don't believe we should be debating this matter. We don't believe. We don't. This is a Can I continue? The Constitution is a reserved matter to Westminster. We should not even be discussing this today, hence there's no amendment. Now, the Tories do...
OK, you've made your point.
The Tories have said they do like to call me some sort of closet nationalist. I accept that. And they say Reform UK has got members in it who previously supported independence. I mean, to clarify, I would align myself with John Buchan, who was a Conservative MP. And he said 100 years ago, speaking in the House of Commons in 1932, John Buchan said that every Scot should be a Scottish nationalist. But he went on further, he said it can be proved, if it can be proved, that a separate Scottish Parliament was desirable, that is to say the merits were greater than the disadvantages and dangers, Scots should support it. Now, my view on this is that he was not advocating Scottish independence, as you're discussing today, but he was a unionist nationalist, and that's how I'd align myself. Strongly Scottish in identity and culture, but committed to the United Kingdom, which is the best place for us to build a prosperity. He argued that preserving Scotland's national character within the Union, rather than actually dissolving the Union itself. So that is my position. The question is, what is the SNP position? Presiding Officer, it's become increasingly clear to me that the SNP's position on independence, they don't actually want it. Because if they did, they'd have spent the last 12 years actually preparing Scotland to become independent. They would have spent the last 12 years answering the questions they couldn't answer in 2014, like currency, like how do you borrow money without a credit card, pretty basic, like deficit, how do you join the EU when you're only allowed a 4% deficit and they've got a 12% deficit? Yes, I'll give way.
I certainly look forward to never hearing Reform MSPs speak about reserved matters in this Parliament, but I'm very keen that the member answers the earlier question about if this is a voluntary union, how does Scotland leave? So that's very nicely leading me exactly to that point. So currency, no answer. Deficit, 12% deficit with the EU needs a 3%, no answer. A hard border with England, where 60% of our exports in Scotland go to England. Pensions, where Scottish pensioners are greatly protected by the umbrella of 65 million rather than 5 million contributors. And defence, where we've got Russian subs circling Scotland right now. So I would say to this, I would say the Scottish National Party that Alex Salmond actually did a pretty admirable job to move the independence movement from 30% to 45%. And I would argue that when he passed the baton to Nicola Sturgeon, he was entitled to think she and John Swinney would move it from 45 to 60%. But what's actually happened, and to answer the question on the two interventions, polling in 2014 in Scots who voted for the separatist parties was 1.4 million Scots. In 2021, Holyrood, that number was 1.3 million Scots. And in last 3 weeks ago, on the 7th of May, that number was 1 million Scots voted for separatist parties. That is less than a quarter of the electorate voting for separation. How can that ever be considered a mandate to break up the UK? To quote the First Minister, how can that be presented as compelling and demonstrable evidence that Scots want to separate from the UK? I don't see it myself. I'm just going to finish with this little anecdote. When I was a Scotland Office Minister, I went to the Arctic Assembly in Iceland, and my job was to shadow Air Miles Angus Robertson to every meeting he went into. I had to go in afterwards as he ran around the world telling everyone how monstrous Westminster was and wouldn't let Scotland go. The Icelandic Prime Minister said to me, Mr Robertson's just been in and complained about you being nasty to him and not letting Scotland have independence. And I said, look, in my reckoning, Norway went independent in 1905, and they had a 96% vote in favour. She said, yes. I said, you in Iceland, you went independent in 1944, and you had a 98% vote in favour of independence. I said, well, we had a vote in 2014, and only 45% of people voted for independence. She said, it's difficult enough to launch an independent country with 96%, but you can't do it with 45%. The fact is, the majority of Scots do not favour separation. And this debate is just a 5-year rolling performative ritual. And I would say the SNP have only got themselves to blame for this.
I think in the future they'll look back in the last 25 years of government and wonder why on earth they didn't actually advance the cause by making Scotland Indy ready. Instead, all they ever did was talk and blame Westminster. Same old SNP, always victims.